We must search for what is truth.
You doubt me?
Seek truth.
What is truth? And what is God?
The first duty is to the truth, whether it's scientific truth, or historical truth, or personal truth.
Then here is the proof you seek.
You don't really want an answer to that question.
Welcome to the AxPx podcast, season 4, episode 3. I am your host, Sean DeRager. Thanks for sticking with us. Really excited about today's show, you guys. We are talking about the philosophies and religions of Star Trek. My buddy Bob McDonald is going to be joining us. We're going to have a really cool conversation, hear a lot of his insights. Being a priest and a Star Trek fan. So I'm really excited to talk to him about all of this. You can find all of our social media links over at theaxpx.com, including our Twitter, which is theaxpx. I would love to hear from all of you as you're listening to the show. Tweet out what you think, any questions, anything like that. As you're listening, it'll be a lot of fun. I'll definitely respond. You can also check out our Patreon. You can become a patron just for $1 a month, and you'll get a lot of behind-the-scenes information. Any interviews that I do will be thrown up there, completely unedited, so you can always refer back to specific interviews and things like that. Let's go ahead and get started with today's show.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Her ongoing mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life forms and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before.
Star Trek and Star Wars have been a part of my life pretty much as long as I can remember. As a kid, I'd pretend to be Han Solo lost in the frozen plains of Hoth. I daydream about riding a speeder through the redwoods. And Princess Leia, she was my princess. Many other days, I'd pretend to be Captain Kirk, climbing the Vasquez rocks to confront Gorn. Or I'd try to vanquish my brother by giving him the Vulcan nerve pinch. As I got older, I began to be drawn in by Star Trek The Next Generation. My dad and I would stay up late Saturday nights and watch the show. I'd always known the original series. It was a staple of visiting my grandparents, but something about Captain Picard and his crew always stuck with me. What Gene Roddenberry's universe offered above George Lucas's universe was deeper and something possibly attainable by the human race. And don't get me wrong, there's always a place for Star Wars. But as I explored my own spirituality, that complex journey was mirrored in many ways by multiple Star Trek episodes. Last episode, I spoke with Richard Garriott about his travels to space. As the interview drew to a close, I asked him if Star Trek had inspired his passions for space. Here was his answer.
Well, no, I'm a huge Star Wars and Star Trek fan. And by the way, I took Scotty's ashes. Scotty, James Doohan, the actor who played Scotty. I took his ashes to the International Space Station and sent some of them on a spacewalk into space and brought some down to return to his family to fulfill his wishes of being sent into space as one of his final wishes in life.
That's awesome.
And so I have a deep connection, I would say, to Star Trek. And it's interesting because I think about the Prime Directive, and I think about the first encounter with aliens that presumably we'll someday have, or our first encounter with a super intelligence, which will probably be the AIs we unleash ourselves. And and so I think that a lot of the Star Trek philosophy is actually important to discuss.
Yeah.
Because it is reasonable to wonder, when will we encounter a Borg-like, entity, whether we create it or encounter it, and when will we, have the War of the Worlds, either in the sense of disease or the War of the Worlds in the sense of an invader. Those things are all very real possibilities, and Star Trek did a really good job of trying to explore all those angles. And I'm not sure which one will come true. I mean, I think they're all actual risks. I mean, we really do have a risk of unleashing the AI that will consume us. We really do have a risk of encountering a true interstellar intelligence that probably at least won't care about us and could be malevolent. So those are all true potentials.
Inspired by Richard's answer to my Star Trek question, I put the question out to all of you via social media. How has Star Trek shaped your personal philosophy or worldview? Here are some of your responses.
Yes, Star Trek did shape my worldview, but it didn't have anything to do with spirituality, even though there were some spiritual elements to it. It was more of what a hopeful future for humanity could look like. That's what I got out of it.
This is Tom DeRigger, Sean's dad. Hey, Sean, live long and prosper. One of the things that comes to mind is that much effort is expended in the series at trying to do the right thing in a plethora of circumstances. Much of the content is about making good moral decisions. Although the show is intentionally secular in nature, the high moral standards which were honored demonstrated an adherence to human innate conscience, which coincides with the natural law, known as the laws of nature's God. The show portrays a desire for the best ideals to win the day by winning over your fellow travelers by good example and persuasion first and foremost, if possible, of course. I appreciate the fact that they use stuns a lot. In my career as a Trekkie from my early days, not watching reruns, by the way, but as they were produced, I was not a real fan of Deep Space Nine or the Voyager segments, but everything else, I think, they did a great job. They do a great job with their movies coming out. Anyways, that's my thoughts on it.
Hey, this is Joshua Craig from Raleigh, North Carolina. My most impactful moment was from Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. Kirk is talking to Sybok, and he asks Sybok, what does God need with a starship? So every time I think about, churches asking for money, churches asking for donations for this, that, and the other, I wonder, what does God need with that? He doesn't need anything we have. He's supposed to have everything, right? All-powerful, all-knowing, all that jazz.
Hey, this is Joy Newcomb. I think growing up as a young person in the late 70s, early 80s, I probably wasn't fully aware of all the ways that Star Trek shaped my worldview, but I do remember being aware that Nichelle Nichols, she was a female officer on Star Trek. Actually, after the series ended, helped NASA recruit female astronauts. So, in a way, Gene Roddenberry helped shape not just a worldview, but helped shape the future. So, that's sort of awesome. Not just sort of awesome, that is awesome. And how awesome when something like that, an actor takes a role so seriously and understands the significance culturally of what she helped make happen, where she transfers her ability to inspire into the actual world, and NASA and all of us were better for it. And that was something that I aspired to seeing. I wanted to see more women in leadership, and Gene Roddenberry created it. And then as this series went along, he added Counselor Deanna Troi and Dr. Beverly Crusher, and so they were there. And so it shaped my worldview that it was possible, if not right when I was growing up, at least in the future it was going to be possible. So, yeah, I think he affirmed my aspirations for what I hope my worldview would be. And then as far as getting along with other cultures, that is certainly something that I also found appealing. So I would have to say yes, but in this subtle way that I kind of wasn't even aware was happening, because he could create this world outside of our existence that seemed to have no boundaries, and it was an appealing way to think about the world. It wasn't scary because, at the end of the day, Star Trek always was conquering. Star Trek was always venturing into the world. So it wasn't scary. The future wasn't a scary place because of Gene Roddenberry. And it was actually very appealing for a young woman.
Derek Smith, aka Giraffis. Just wanted to call in, talk to you a little bit about how the philosophy of Star Trek kind of affected my life. Even though the Prime Directive says not to intervene, I figured I'd fudge the rules just like Captain Kirk would. Anywho, growing up in a really small town, there wasn't a lot of diversity around for me, but one of the things that really appealed to me with Star Trek is there was so much diversity, and StarFleet fostered that. They helped bring people together, different species, different planets, and that really allowed me to look at things and, look at people, in a different way, so that I was able to look at them for what they did and not just, what they looked like.
Hey, this is John Golson. One of the things that I've been thinking about lately was getting an IDIC tattoo, the IDIC tattoo, which is also known as the Vulcan symbol, which stands for infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And to me, that's something that I've begun to cling to stronger and stronger the older I've gotten. Whereas when I was a kid, I think Star Trek was very much about just the adventure, and I was a Star Wars kid, so spaceships and laser guns and aliens, it had me from go. But as I've gotten older and as I've explored the show and really, read more and gotten into the themes, I think one of the things that I just keep coming down to is that IDIC, that IDIC, which is this thought that the infinite universe, it's so vast, there's so much out there. And if we are to believe, and we know that there's so much out there, then we have to imagine that there's just an infinite amount of diversity and an infinite amount of combinations. But I think we're very singular. We try to force everyone to see things from our perspective as me, a white guy, or even humans in the way that they relate to God. They want God to look like them and be like them, and we talk about how God appreciates thank you and things like that. It's all things that are very human characteristics to this being that should be omnipresent and close to not being able to be comprehended by a human brain. So I think we get focused, we get myopic, we are so worried about ourselves and how things relate to us that I think it's really important to consider the infinite diversity in infinite combinations and start to think about the fact that we are just as humans, as me, I am just one grain of sand on a beach of billions and billions and billions of other grains of sand, to get Carl Sagan. But yeah, that's something that Star Trek has reinforced to me, and it becomes more and more important to me the older I get. Thank you.
On today's podcast, friend of the show, Bob McDonald, joins me to explore and discuss the philosophy and religions of Star Trek. Bob McDonald, who I had on the show a while back during what we're calling Season 3, Bob brought this idea my way about talking about Star Trek and religion and philosophy in that context of the universe that Gene Roddenberry created with Star Trek. And at the time, I really wanted to do it, and then the podcast, I stopped doing it for a while. And now that I've launching this back up again, I'm starting to jot down ideas. I immediately thought of this as a show. So Bob McDonald joins us.
Hello.
Now what's the title you go by? Like, you and I have talked about you had the church thing you're doing at the time.
Right.
You've been ordained since then. So what's been going on, man? Let's do a quick little rundown.
A quick recap. When we first spoke in the first show we did together, I was heading a community here in southern Indiana called the Gnostic Church of Dharma and Virtue. And in that time, and during that interview, and then in the months after leading up to my ordination, the church went through a bit of I called it a crystallization, a change from kind of a loose structure to a more traditional focused structure. There were things that we wanted to do as a community and as a church that led us in the direction of me meeting certain individuals, one being a man who became my ordaining bishop, the Metropolitan Catholicos of the Oriental Apostolic Church of Damcar, a man by the name of Tal Michael III Basilides. So this is a gentleman that exists in an apostolic and liturgical structure, one that I was seeking, and as we got to talk and as we got to become friends, it became obvious to me that was the direction that the church that I was in was going toward. So on December 3rd, I received ordination into the rank or the office of the priesthood under the authority of Tal Michael, apostolically valid ordination. Some refer to the churches in which we function to be kind of this independent liturgical apostolic world, the old Catholic Church and certain Gnostic churches, anything that is outside of what are known as the bigger bodies of Catholic or Orthodox churches that express a liturgical and Eucharistically focused style. One of the directions we were heading in. So the Gnostic Church of Dharma and Virtue changed in a way and became the Priory of the Rose Cross. We became a church under the umbrella of the Oriental Apostolic Church of Damcar. We became part of the Church of Damcar. And I became a priest under the Church of Damcar, and that's how I serve to this day. Currently, I hold the office of Archpriest. I serve Mass once a month. Right now, we can do once a month. Hopefully, we'll be able to do more as the church grows in number. We do have membership. We are active. And we're essentially still a Gnostic church with very universal properties to ourselves. It's just that we have focused our expression of that tradition in a liturgical and apostolic Christian setting. We're all very comfortable with that. I'm myself feel like I've gained tremendously in my time in the church so far, and it's been very beneficial for everybody. So there has been that change.
So what's the title? I'm gonna pronounce it wrong. I'm not versed in these ways.
Msgr.
Msgr. Okay.
Got it.
There we go. It's not that hard there.
Right.
So Msgr Bob McDonald.
Hello. That's right.
Excellent. Alongside your involvement with the church, you are also involved in, you're a long-standing member of StarFleet in the International Star Trek Fan Association.
I'm a complete Trekkie. I'm not a Trekker. I'm a Trekkie. See, Trekker seems to be something that people say to seem cooler than saying I'm a Trekkie, but the reality is I'm just one of those super obsessed Star Trek fans, and I have been since I've been a kid. So for many years, and I took some time off in the years in between, but from when I was 14, I joined StarFleet, the International Star Trek Fan Association, and I was a member for many years, member of a local chapter here in southern Indiana, and chapters kind of run like, they kind of style themselves after the ships you see in the Star Trek series, right? So they're given names and, USS so-and-so, NCC, whatever. And everyone holds fictional ranks, and the ranks kind of reflect your involvement in the organization as a whole. So I was a member for many years. Life kind of got in the way. I stopped being a member, and then years ago I rejoined, and currently I'm a member of a Columbia. And it's a correspondence chapter or an online chapter, so there are rare meetings of the people involved, but we meet online, and it's just a way for us to kind of discuss Star Trek and have an outlet, get to know each other.
Nice. Very nice. I first discovered Star Trek probably as a kid, almost just by being around it. I remember I would be at my grandparents' house, and we lived next door to them, and they would always have Star Trek on, and I would always watch it. And then I think as I got older, I realized what time the reruns were on, so I would make sure I was over there watching the original Star Trek series. And then eventually, as I got older, Star Trek: The Next Generation came out, so that became my dad and I's time and excuse for me to stay up late. I believe on a Saturday night at 10:30 is when they would start. So we would start, watching Star Trek, and that was kind of our thing. Every Saturday night we would stay up and watch Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I was hooked, man. That just got me hooked even more. When I was younger, I'd always watch the films.
Okay.
And I would always watch the theatrical films. I think I saw Star Trek 4 in the theater with my parents. That, I think, for me was a departure, because it was actually, most of it took place on Earth and involved, very pressing matters, right, with saving whales.
Right.
Which sounds silly, but at the time, that, I believe that was something that was,
it was
very
a big
much
time social issue
in the popular culture.
The issue with, that was when, if you think about it, that was when this kind of, outside of kind of what was introduced in the 60s with the counterculture and stuff, that was really when people started to really focus on what was happening as far as our affecting the environment. And Star Trek 4, and of course whales were, we forget that there was a time where it was just open season. Whales were just harvested like any other form of, animal that we harvest, like tuna. It was kind of it was an industry in a sense. And we started to see real ecological damage being done. And that's when, I remember in school, that's when Earth Day, the idea of Earth Day started to be really talked about and supported. And of course, yesterday, I believe, was Earth Day, right? I know it was the March for Science.
Yeah.
So Star Trek, of course, does what it does, and it took a storyline and focused on the social issues of the time, and Star Trek has a tendency of showing us the better way, and this is one of my draws to the universe of Star Trek, is that Star Trek, the individuals in the Star Trek universe, in the situation, more often than not, take the highest road, and that leads to a better life for everybody. So that's what you saw happening, where this probe came to Earth, right? And it started just wrecking the planet up in a sense, not, I guess, intentionally, but it was trying to communicate with humpback whales, which this probe saw as Earth's intelligent life form. And at the time that the probe had visited Earth, theoretically, the whales probably were, right? So they realized that at the time in the storyline, of course, humpback whales were extinct, and so they had to bring these humpback whales to the future. They had to go back and get some and bring them back to save the planet. And the allegory there, I think, is still applicable. We're still wrestling currently with the subject matter brought up in Star Trek 4. I guess you can use the analogy, we're either at the crossroads or we're on the precipice, right? We're in this place where the decisions that we make now are going to have long-term effects, and there has been, interestingly enough, in our culture, some kind of a blowback to the kind of the progression that we had been making. There's this I don't even know how to explain it properly, but there's this part of our society is rejecting the progress and the facts that science is showing us, as far as a refusal to believe in climate change. Of course, anyone that understands what these scientists are talking about, even in a rudimentary form, can see that there is climate change happening. It's not a fiction. And I think that what was interesting about Star Trek IV is that it showed us maybe a world where, of course, in the history of Star Trek itself, in the storyline, humans go through like World War III. They go through another great nuclear war, and the species is almost devastated to the point of, it can't be repaired. And humans in general come to a agreement, almost like they have a change in consciousness, where they realize that the way they've been living all this time hasn't gotten them where they should be or where they need to be. They need to get rid of biases, and they need to get over themselves, in a sense, to work together to maintain and to grow and progress as a species. And currently we're seeing this dichotomy, or this argument happening between, even in our own country, these groups. One group is saying that the progress is forced, and another group is saying that the progress is necessary. And so we're at this crossroads, right? And I think that in Star Trek, one of the appeals of it is that it's always shown us that when we work together, and when we unify, and when we put aside prejudice and bias and bigotries, and we embrace science, and we embrace rationality, that we will go far as a species. That we will overcome these things that are almost throwbacks to an unenlightened time. Wars and nationalism on a scale of subjugating other groups, racism, sexism, everything that's in the forefront of this kind of societal discussion that's happening right now. So where does that, how does religion in Star Trek factor in on that? I guess I would say that if you would look at even like Gene Roddenberry's own view of religion, wasn't very, he didn't regard religion too highly. He saw religion as being problematic, and that it was one of those things that led to the issues such as wars and bigotry and exclusion, and he was very much a humanist. So he kind of, when he created Star Trek, I think, and of course, when you look at the bureaucracy of religions today, when you look at how, when you look at the systems that are in place, they're still causing problems. They've not learned how to fully work together, and the consciousness of the people that practice these larger religions are still they still have blinders on, and it's one of those things that's someone like me as a person of faith, I see that, and I have to just be humble about the criticism, because it's not like the criticism is unfounded.
If you read science fiction, the more you read it, the more you realize that you and the universe are part of the same thing. Science still knows practically nothing about the real nature of matter, energy, dimension, or time, and even less about those remarkable things called life and thought. But whatever the meaning and purpose of this universe, you are a legitimate part of it. And since you are part of the all that is, part of its purpose, there is more to you than just this brief speck of existence. You are just a visitor here in this time and this place, a traveler through it. What a difference that makes. As a traveler here, it no longer crushes you that this world is not always fair or orderly or understandable. Your passport allows you to fix what you can, to love, to refuse to take part in ugliness. But meanwhile, you are delighted that this is such a varied, colorful, exciting place. As a traveler, you're not here to judge, but to experience. You begin to feel a new affection for the life forms here. You no longer feel threatened that some may be greater or lesser than you. It's only important that you've been given this marvelous opportunity to enjoy this trip, to learn from it, and in my case, write about it. Perhaps you know where I'm leading. On a trip like this, and it is a trip, its loveliness is not in the sameness of people and things, but in their incredible variety. Eventually, this led me to the Star Trek statement, IDIC, infinite diversity from infinite combinations. Thank whatever created us, we are different. Each of us and everything around us. To the end of time, if it ever does end, no combination will ever come up quite the same. That's quite a travel package. All of this is how Star Trek began, and it's also something of what it's about. I am an alien, and so are you. And yet, and this is the loveliest thing of all, somehow we're also part of each other and part of everything that is.
Gene Roddenberry, I have a quote from him right here. He says, "I condemn false prophets. I condemn the effort to take away the power of rational decision, to drain people of their free will, and a hell of a lot of money in the bargain. Religions vary in their degree of idiocy, but I reject them all. For most people, religion is nothing more than a substitute for a malfunctioning brain."
Pretty hardcore.
If you look at kind of how he, brought this philosophy into the Star Trek, into his vision of the future. And you've touched on some of these, and this is from humanism.org.uk. So I have a little list here of some things, little bullet points, and you've touched on some of these already, but his philosophy about the future, was cooperation and mutual encouragement. So the crew, they smooth tensions over by treating each other with care and concern, peaceful problem solving. For the most part, Kirk and Picard aren't all about starting fights. They first try to talk and negotiate and work out a peaceful solution. And I feel like we saw that a lot, and maybe just because I saw it the most. But in The Next Generation, Picard was very much about peacefully finding a solution to the situation.
Yes.
Equal dignity and respect for every life form. No dogma or doctrine. Very rarely, I think, do they put any doctrine on anyone else. A lot of these episodes touched on certain things with their personal characters, but everything as far as the Starfleet went, it was just, you didn't really have that. You really only had the prime directive, which we'll get to in a second.
Right.
And then reliance on science to find facts, but enjoyment of human emotions, spirituality, and intuition.
Yeah.
So they celebrated diversity. They celebrated different civilizations that they would interact with. But mainly if you were, I guess, in Starfleet especially, that really wasn't on the agenda, because they were all about the whole goal of exploring the stars was to better humanity and better themselves and to learn and grow.
The economics of the future is somewhat different. You see, money doesn't exist in the 24th century.
No money? You mean you don't get paid?
The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
I think that what I would, some of this is just my speculation when I think of what, like for instance, someone like me who's a priest, who is a person of faith. If I was in that universe and I was living at that time, I feel that the understanding among people in the let's just say on Earth, let's just focus kind of on what's happening on Earth in the Star Trek universe, or amongst humans, is that they understand that you have the personal freedom of self-expression, and that self-expression can take on the form of art, religion, the pursuit of philosophy, the pursuit of anything that that the person feels they need to help kind of uplift themselves. But at the same time, they take care to consider everybody. So it's again, it's kind of like it's a societal mind change where it's stopped from becoming, everyone's not isolated from the other person. Everyone is considering the greater good. And to do that, the need to put your ideas over onto someone else and force them to comply has disappeared. So that inherent animosity that you find whenever you find competing religions that are trying to say, well, my way is the only way, or my way is the only way, and each one is trying to put a dominance over the other, that the animosity that brings has vanished because that mindset is totally gone. So religion in some ways, I think, is viewed as being parts of religion or religious practice is viewed as being, just gone, outdated. And other parts of religious practice are seen as being very tolerable, and people tolerate it because it's the person's individual choice. And there's the soft paradox of Gene Roddenberry, in that he personally didn't regard religion as being necessary at all, and in fact saw that in his view, in the future, religion would not be needed for humanity to overcome these obstacles that they've placed in front of themselves, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, due to the very nature of his acceptance of diversity and the mosaic of the human experience, spirituality is still present, and it's still a part of some humans' inherent, approach to the universe around them. So I think Star Trek, even though Gene Roddenberry himself was a humanist, I believe that how Star Trek was created, it was very much an amalgamated series. I mean, it was created from a group of writers. There were input from other people for all of the different series, from the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, all of them, Enterprise. That there were groups of people, and they were all approaching the story of Star Trek from their own subjective reality, right? So they understood, and I think Gene Roddenberry to a degree also understood, that there's still going to be these people that embrace spirituality. And I think one way to tackle those ideas was that alien races were kind of imbued at times with different philosophical or spiritual practices that people had to approach, had to negotiate, had to learn about. The Vulcans with their radical embrace of Stoicism, and the Klingons with their almost near Viking view of Stovacor, the Bajoran belief in the prophets that existed in the wormhole. Within the Star Trek, and even in certain episodes, they even touch on how humanity still, there are those that still adhere personally to a spiritual practice. In Enterprise, in the series Enterprise, I think the episode was Cold Front. There was a scene where there was a group of pilgrims, and they were going to the Plume of Agasauria? I'm going to get nailed by my friends in Columbia if I get this stuff wrong. The Plume of Agasauria. All right, so guys, if I said that wrong, I'm sorry. There were these pilgrims that showed up on the Enterprise, and the Enterprise hosted them. And in one scene, they had a dinner together where they were discussing religion and faith. And it came up and Dr. Flock seemed very enthusiastic about the idea of learning about these pilgrims' particular view. And he talked about his time on Earth and how he had gone, I think Captain Archer had said something that he had visited a Tibetan Buddhist monastery. Dr. Phlox even makes the statement that he attended Mass at St. Peter's Square. So this idea that faith still exists is very much part of the Star Trek canon. But it's just, I feel that the understanding is that how that faith is approached has evolved in a sense. So it's lost its tribal edge. It's lost its sharpness to other paths that it comes into contact with.
It's so interesting to hear them when they refer to like, you know, Earth, because Earth's almost on this whole other, especially when they're traveling through space. It's almost like, I mean, I feel like they go to Earth quite a bit, but they don't live, like all these people they're all in their, you know, their ships, right? They're living and
right.
Their colonies are on these ships.
Yes.
So they're very divorced from daily Earth life. So it makes sense that there still would be on Earth practicing religions and people exercising their faith. Whereas if you're in the stale corridors of a starship, you may have different, you know, day to day and different beliefs. And maybe you keep that all to a close circle of friends or something like that.
I wish we could have examined that belief of his more closely. It seems illogical for a sun worshipper to develop a philosophy of total brotherhood. Sun worship is usually a primitive superstition religion.
I'm afraid you have it all wrong, Mr. Spock, all of you. I've been monitoring some of their old-style radio waves. The Empire spokesman trying to ridicule their religion. But he couldn't. Well, don't you understand? It's not the sun up in the sky. It's the Son of God.
Caesar and Christ, they had them both. And the word is spreading only now.
Philosophy of total love and total brotherhood. It will replace their imperial Rome, but it will happen in their 20th century.
Wouldn't it be something to watch, to be a part of? To see it happen all over again.
The Prime Directive is what everyone who has gone through Starfleet adheres to, and it's brought up a lot. It's contradicted a lot sometimes, and depending on the episode, you can argue. But I'm going to read what the Prime Directive is.
Okay.
And then we'll go from there. This is a quote. This is the actual Prime Directive. As the right of each sentient species to live in accordance with its normal cultural evolution is considered sacred, no Starfleet personnel may interfere with the normal and healthy development of alien life and culture. Such interference includes introducing superior knowledge, strength, or technology to a world whose society is incapable of handling such advantages wisely. Starfleet personnel may not violate this Prime Directive, even to save their lives and or their ship, unless they're acting to right an earlier violation or an accidental contamination of said culture. This directive takes precedence over any and all other considerations and carries with it the highest moral obligation.
The Prime Directive is not just a set of rules. It is a philosophy, and a very correct one. History has proved again and again that whenever mankind interferes with a less developed civilization, no matter how well-intentioned that interference may be, the results are invariably disastrous.
That is Starfleet's #1 rule.
Yes.
That is the dogma that you find that they have to wrestle with, the structure, the dogmatic code that they have to negotiate as they go through these issues in which the Prime Directive becomes the forefront of the problem. And you see them handling that in a variety of different ways, and sometimes out and out just violating it because they have no choice. For the greater good, they just simply do it. But it is that one thing. So it's still there. I guess the desire at times to codify our lives and to bring such structure into our actions would still, I think, be a part of the human psyche. I think that having the prime directive, I see the prime directive as a good thing, but I also see wrestling with it as a good thing too. I think that they needed to have that because they could have. There are instances in the Star Trek story where humans don't make the best choices, or they make selfish choices, or they become a little villainous. And if you would give people kind of the freedom to change things as they felt was right, without giving the species the freedom to be itself and to find its own destiny, you could encounter all kinds of horrible results.
So what were some episodes, I guess, that would have spoke to you on some levels? It's funny because you brought up Who Watches the Watchers, right. Next Generation episode, and that's the one that I've seen the most dealing with religion. That's the one that you find a lot of clips on, and it wrestles with this because I think the main plot is, or the main conundrum that they're put in is they want Picard to kind of become a god to these people. Like, what's the setup of that plot?
Basically, there was a Vulcan type species. I don't even know. I think they might be referred to as proto-Vulcan species that were in technologically, of course, nowhere near as advanced as the folks in the Enterprise, and they were being monitored. They were being kind of studied by Starfleet. They were being studied. Their cultures and their heritage, their language, everything about them was being studied. And I can't remember what happened because I haven't seen the episode in some time. I've seen clips, but I can't remember what happened. But there was an exposure where I think Riker was kind of his disguise. I think Troy and Riker had gone down, and Riker's disguise had given way, and they realized that he wasn't.
No, Riker and Troy beam down, and I see it. I'm looking it up here, and they have they're disguised. As they kind of have the Vulcan eyebrows, a little bit of the Vulcan haircuts. Mm-hmm.
Right. So there was basically the Prime Directive was broken, and so what happened is the society, which was inherently not superstitious, and it kind of abandoned religion, and it was just living kind of a rational, nature-centered, lifestyle. One of the individuals thought that this person has to be, there's some kind of religious reason why this is happening. There's some divine intervention going on, and so he becomes kind of radicalized, if I remember right, and it kind of throws the community in an uproar. It kind of does what the Prime Directive wants to not do, and it upset the balance of a indigenous species developing naturally through the influence of Starfleet. And so as a result, one of the scientists felt that the solution to the problem would be for Picard to go down and someone to go down and give some kind of guidelines for these people in a way to become their god, in order to fix the damage that had been done. That was like the only thing they could think of, and Picard absolutely refused to do it.
Dr. Baron, I will not impose a set of commandments on these people. To do so violates the very essence of the Prime Directive.
Like it or not, we have rekindled the Mintargan's belief in the Overseer.
And are you saying that this belief will eventually become a religion?
It's inevitable. And without guidance, that religion could degenerate into inquisitions, holy wars, chaos. Horrifying.
Dr. Barron, your report describes how rational these people are. Millennia ago, they abandoned their belief in the supernatural. Now you are asking me to sabotage that achievement, to send them back into the dark ages of superstition and ignorance and fear? No!
And ultimately, if I remember right, the show ended with Picard bringing one of the members to the Enterprise and showing her that he was mortal, of flesh and blood, and he simply was just more technologically advanced. And she understood it. And they were comfortable with that because they were rationally minded. And it's like the rationality won out in that story, where they simply accepted the truth of the matter. They didn't give in to the superstition because Picard didn't give in to allowing that to happen. And I thought that was an interesting episode because it deals with it kind of for people of faith. You have to watch some of these episodes, and again, there has to be a little humility involved in the understanding of what, for instance, Picard was saying about is coming from. You know, when he talked about religion in this kind of way of being this product of this dark age, at times the faithful need to look to themselves to see, you know, what is happening in the faiths of the world that's contributing to this kind of understanding of religion as being something that is, you know, against the progression of humanity. And we have to be very serious with the discussion of what do we do as faithful to change that inherent prejudice that maybe certain religious will have, and how do we overcome and evolve ourselves to meet the needs of the entire human community. So I've just, you know, I found Star Trek has always challenged me in that respect, in that when I see its example for the future, I do see things that are missing. Now, I will say, like, for instance, in the series in the show Data's Day, when he was kind of walking around, he attended, for instance, a celebration of the Festival of Lights, which is a Hindu festival. So even on the Enterprise, humans of varying religions are celebrating religious ideas. But like I said, I just keep going back to where I think that at that time, those lower aspects that people of faith have kind of clung to, the tribalism and the exclusivity and the subtle bigotries, those have all gone away. And so you're left with simply the ability to expand your consciousness and your spirit through the personal searching, for your own personal search for the divine. I think that spirituality, I could make the argument that spirituality in the Star Trek universe is able to reach and manifest its true purpose, because there is the freedom to express without going back into that kind of primal bigoted mindset of my way is better than your way and I am inherently better than you. Because that is what is happening in the world today, whether we like it or not. There are groups that consider themselves more valid to live, more valid to exist in this world than other groups. And those other groups feel the same way, that their way should take precedence, that there should be that their way is inherently better, the way that other people practice is not. And there's these bigotries that if as long as those exist, this future in Star Trek can't happen. And that's something, and so that's why I think why Gene Roddenberry, one, his own lack of needing religion in his life, really. But what he saw is these big problems that he didn't understand how you could overcome them without religion just going away.
Right. Yeah. So in stuff you've sent me in preparation for this, you mentioned Worf.
Yeah.
And how he, in your opinion, is probably the most faith-driven out of all the crew just because of the Klingon way of life.
I prefer Klingon beliefs.
I suppose your gods aren't as cryptic as ours.
Our gods are dead. Ancient Klingon warriors slew them a millennia ago. They were more trouble than they were worth.
I remember these episodes, but they're so vague. I'm starting to rewatch Star Trek The Next Generation again. I'm halfway through. I'm almost done with season 2. So, all these are starting to come back to me, but I know that you're right about him because he has always been even more so than like Spock, because Spock, they're very rational, but he was half human, right? So he always had to wrestle with emotions and logic, right? But Worf, coming from this, like you've said, Viking-like culture of the Klingons, and all of a sudden seeing himself as a Starfleet officer, I mean, that wasn't, you don't see many, I don't think we saw many Klingons in Starfleet other than Worf that I can think of. But what's your connection with him?
Well, to start off with, I think that, and I'll get to Worf in a second, but I think that in every incarnation of the Star Trek series, whether, like in the original series, I think the one that would have searched for the meaning of the spirit most would have been Spock. In the Next Generation, I believe that it was, well, you could also say Data had his own moments where he really explored his own nature, where he almost said things that could be considered to be spiritual, revelations of the spirit that Data had. But Worf was really the one that actively struggled with living with his faith, openly living with his faith, and somehow making that work in the society that he lived in and that he served in, which was Starfleet. And then, like in Deep Space Nine, you have Major Kira, who's a Bajoran and who's very devoted to the prophets, and her faith is readily tested. Deep Space Nine is probably my favorite of the series. Her faith is deeply tested on a regular basis. Captain Sisko also goes through matters of the spirit. There's just a lot of that happening. A lot of it, I think, is probably a result of many of those shows being kind of designed and written by Ron Moore, who did the revised or the renewed Battlestar Galactica that Sci-Fi Channel aired, which really dealt with matters of faith and stuff. But I think the writing in Deep Space Nine kind of, because a new group was doing it, the explored matters, I think, a little differently. But you had Major Kira in Deep Space Nine. In Voyager, you had Chakotay, who was a member of the First Nations, and he came from a tribe that went on vision quests, and it was, in fact, he helped Janeway go on a vision quest. So you have that, and I think in Enterprise you had potentially Dr. Phlox, I think, kind of was the one that was most open to matters of the spirit. Of course, this is all my opinion. But as far as the Next Generation goes, Worf several times met a crisis of faith, and had to figure out what that meant and where he would go from there. And what I found interesting with him is that his faith would take on kind of this new form, but he wouldn't lose it. He, as a character, evolved as a spiritual character, as someone that pursued the matters of the spirit, and he believed in an afterlife. He believed in Sto-vo-kor at times he grappled with its reality, but then he would instinctively fall back on his knowledge of it. And it seems like, for instance, for myself, I think it's a lie to say that people don't grapple with the real tough questions. And, we see that our faiths, my faith in particular, being a sacramental priest, someone that says Mass and consecrates the Eucharist, I am part of a faith of mystery. And at the same time, I embrace rationality. And I very much have to balance that within myself. And so I'm constantly going through a process to where I'm having to push myself to grow in my faith, because I think that's the point, really. So Worf did the same thing, and of course there was this episode, was it Way of the Warrior, maybe? I could have that episode wrong.
The episode was actually called Rightful Heir.
Rightful Heir, yes. Where Kahless reappears. And it turns out that it's, spoiler alert, it was Kahless's clone, right? And that really sent him into an issue. Like, he really like, because at first, he was on Boreth, and I think he was having this vision, and Kahless appears to him, and it's like, I mean, that's what you want, right? When you're in a vision quest, like if I was in a vision quest, I would kind of hope that maybe a vision would happen, or something would come of it. And it did for him, and all of a sudden it's like it's really happening, and then he realizes that it was all just rationally explained. And it was actually the clone of Kahless that comforts him, I believe, in that particular moment. Because Kahless, the clone of Kahless, basically said, you're questioning whether, any of this is true.
I went to Boreth to find my faith. For a time I thought I had. But my heart is empty again. I do not know what to believe.
You doubt the real Kahless will return one day. You doubt that he is still waiting for you in Stavoko. Kahless left us, all of us, a powerful legacy, a way of thinking and acting that makes us Klingon. If his words hold wisdom and his philosophy is honorable, what does it matter if he returns? What is important is that we follow his teachings. Perhaps the words are more important than the man.
I think, for those of us, for instance, that follow the teachings of Christ, right? Or for others that follow other teachers or masters, Buddhists that adhere to the teachings of Buddha, we have to wrestle with what does that mean in a changing and a growing world? How do we express the worth of those teachings that we feel in our heart to other people? And how do we do it in a way that doesn't seem, to take on the characteristics of what people expect, which is bigoted or sectarian. So Worf, I think, even growing up, I was always very focused on matters of the spirit and matters of what's next or the greater story, in a sense. And I think Worf really tackled a lot of, when I would watch those shows, I would get a lot from it. I felt that, and I never felt, honestly, as growing up watching, because I think that Star Trek, for me, because I started watching it so young, I think in many ways it influenced my worldview. And it's still, that hasn't left me, and that even personally, when I speak of the struggle that man is currently undergoing, I see the example set by Gene Roddenberry and the future he pointed to as being one that we can achieve, and one that is worth fighting for and trying to achieve. You know, it's worth pursuing, because that future gives a home to everybody, and because it doesn't break itself down into smaller groups, because we understand that we're part of the great unity. And that, as a Gnostic priest, that's my core belief, is that we are connected to each other. We're connected to the universe around us. So to me, I have moments. I remember being at this Star Trek convention. It was in Huntsville, Alabama, and I was at this convention, and James Doohan was speaking, right? At the time, at the convention, I think it was in 1996, and Huntsville had been renamed to Star Trek Alabama for this convention, right? And so everyone was there. It was like this big thing. It was the biggest convention I'd ever been to, and I'd been to some big ones. And I've been to a lot of Star Trek conventions in my life, but this was like a big one. And James Doohan was on the stage, and I'll never forget this. And so he starts talking, and he had a tendency to tell this story when he would be, because I'd seen him a time before at a convention, and he had a tendency to tell this story about this person that wrote him.
I got a fan letter from a young lady. It was a suicide note. So I called her. I said, "Hey, this is Jimmy Doohan, Scotty of Star Trek." I said, "I'm doing a convention in Indianapolis. I want to see you there." I saw her. Boy, I'm telling you, I couldn't believe what I saw. It was definitely suicide. You know, somebody had to help her somehow. You know, and obviously she wasn't going to the right people. You know. Anyhow, I said to her, I'm doing a convention 2 weeks from now in St. Louis. And 2 weeks from then in something, you know, and then eventually she also came to New York. She was able to afford to go to these places and everything else. So, and then that went on for 2 or 3 years, maybe 18 times. And all I did was talk positive things to her. And then all of a sudden, nothing. I didn't hear anything. And I had no idea what was happening, because I really never saved her address, right? 8 years later, I get a letter saying, "I do want to thank you so much for what you did for me, because I just got my master's degree in electronic engineering." You know, that's, to me, the best thing I've ever done in my life. And it brings tears to my eyes every time I even talk about the story.
When he was telling the story, the whole audience, I mean, it was like, for people that believe in the philosophy of emergence, how the group and the whole can generate this presence. It was there, and it was powerful, and it was, you can't say it was anything but a spiritual experience for me. I mean, I was moved. I was totally changed by that moment. And that is something that Star Trek does for people without the requirement that they disregard other things. So as someone who is part of the faithful, someone who is a priest like myself, that example was powerful for me, and it was one that still stays with me as I minister to people. So I will never approach someone with the idea that I somehow have some inherent knowledge over them. I'm part of them, and they're part of me, and my only desire is to help them so that they can reach their own potential, the highest of their own potential. And I think in the world of Star Trek, that's what religion does for people in that world. I think that's, in that universe, I think that's where religion, I think that's the, how Star Trek takes the best of people and it amplifies it. I think every aspect of humanity amplifies itself like that. So while while the founder of Star Trek, while Gene Roddenberry himself felt maybe there's no need for religion at all, and that's his view, but he also felt that everything should be open and people should accept one another without preconception and without prejudice. And I think that as we learn that there is still religious practice in spiritual practice in the world of the universe of Star Trek, I think that just like humanity has become their best self, as best as they could be at that time, I think religion has kind of met that as well and become its best self. So I think that if I speculate in this world of Star Trek, where a Catholic priest and a Muslim imam were talking, I think there would be no animosity existing between the two of them. And I think that the people, the faithful in mass, would not have animosity toward each other. That would all go away. So it leaves us open to go further. Because right now we're kind of stuck in a loop. We're stuck in this, like, I don't know, some cult. You know what I'm saying? Oh
yeah, I felt with the last 8 years under Obama, I was like, hey, you know what? I think we can make it to more of a Star Trek we're going more that way of Gene Roddenberry's view of the future, with tolerance and acceptance and appreciating other people's beliefs, but coming together as a human race, right?
Yeah.
And now we're in this whole new administration that it's just like, we've just gone backwards to, we need to just full on tribalism, make America great again, keep America here. Everyone else can shove off. Let's bomb these people over here. Let's threaten to bomb them over here. Whereas I felt like the past administration didn't want, if they didn't want to solve anything with violence, right? It's very much negotiation and talking through things and trying to make things work for all parties. And now we're into, who's got the bigger gun, the biggest bombs, it's, and sometimes maybe you need to go backwards to go forwards. I'm hoping that's what this is. But it's just the similarities are pretty amazing, and it almost shows Gene Roddenberry as being somewhat prophetic.
She changed the lesson to teach us about Galileo. Did you know that he was tried by the Inquisition for teaching that the Earth moved around the sun?
Tried and convicted. His books were burned.
How could anyone be so stupid?
It's easy to look back 7 centuries and judge what was right and wrong.
But the same thing's happening now with all this stuff about the Celestial Temple and the wormhole. It's dumb.
No, it's not. You've got to realize something, Jake. For over 50 years, the one thing that allowed the Bajorans to survive the Cardassian occupation was their faith. The prophets were their only source of hope and courage.
But there were no prophets. They were just aliens that you found in the wormhole.
To those aliens, the future is no more difficult to see than the past. Why shouldn't they be considered prophets?
Are you serious?
My point is, it's a matter of interpretation. It may not be what you believe, but that doesn't make it wrong. If you start to think that way, You'll be acting just like Vedic Wynn, only from the other side.
My expression of my religion appears to people to be very Catholic because it is. It's liturgical. It's sacramental. My worship style is in the same family of, Anglicans, Catholic, Orthodox. I wear, you have the robes and the incense and the liturgy and the, right? And when people come to the church, I receive a couple of different reactions. I either can see them cringe internally, or I can see them be very confused, or a couple of people have kind of gotten it. But the people that cringe, they're drawn to the church because of the open philosophy, tolerance to universalism. We accept everybody without restriction, without concern for sexuality or gender identity. Our church is an open door. And when people hear that, that's very satisfying, and they show up and then they see it basically a Catholic Mass. And they don't know how to rationalize the two because their exposure to it in their life has been very detrimental to them. They suffer from a kind of a form of spiritual PTSD. Mm-hmm. And so they recoil at what I consider to be very beneficial and very wonderful. So I find myself being kind of constantly surprised that they don't understand that I'm not like what they might have been exposed to but it's a visceral reaction based on what's happened in the world around them. And that is a burden, I think, that people of faith need to carry. And they need to understand, all of us that embrace at least the Abrahamic religions to a degree, whether or not our embracing of those religions are esoteric like myself or more orthodox like someone else, we have to accept the culpability of the structures of these faiths for marginalizing people at times. And we have to try to fix or repair that damage. And part of that means that you have to give people the freedom to be very critical of Christianity without the fear of retribution. You have to let them air their grievance and understand that it's coming from a place of legitimacy. It's their feelings. You can't just dismiss, a person's frustration with Christianity, because a lot of hurt has happened in the name of Christianity. And what's so ironic about it is that Christianity itself started out as a persecuted minority faith. And it seems that humans have this kind of this tendency in the species of having amnesia. Once a group gets to a point where they're in more control, they don't remember to themselves, oh yeah, that was real bad when it was us kind of under the thumb. It was really bad whenever we were the ones worshiping in houses and having to be quiet. Instead, they forget about all that and they just start putting the thumb onto someone else. As if, it's this cycle, this repetitive cycle. And when Gene Roddenberry, when he would look at religion, even as a young kid, he would see this. How can you not get frustrated with that? And so I hear that a lot from people that come through the doors of my church or that speak to me, that ask questions. What I'm seeing is that there's been a lot of pain created. So how do I, as a priest, start creating feelings of comfort and safety and security for people? Because there's this tendency, I think, and there's this great divide happening, especially in Christianity right now, where there is ultra conservatism and a celebration of the dismissing of certain groups of people as being a virtue. See, that's really where it gets bad, because these people see this intolerance as a virtue, and they see those of us that reject that as being watered down. And we're not, my Gnostic faith, my Gnostic Christian faith is not watered down. It's simply, I feel that it's challenged itself to move forward. And so we had to answer that challenge. We had to measure up. But it's something that's a work in progress. The challenge of people of faith is that you are supposed to constantly grow, and you're constantly supposed to face the questions head on and understand that you're not going to solve every problem. You're not going to answer any questions, and there's going to be a lot you don't know. And what's happening in the world right now is that people say they have all the answers, and those answers are leading to more problems, because the reality is no one is supposed to have those kind of answers. No one's supposed to, for instance, Mike Pence, this theocracy he wants to build in this country. What would that really do to us? How would that really look? I think it would look pretty awful, because we're a country, we're a pluralistic society, and he is wanting to create a theocratic system of repression. And that to me is frightening beyond belief, because I think that in order, like Gene Roddenberry's examples, and as someone who was influenced by the Star Trek worldview, Gene Roddenberry's, or to live in a pluralistic society, you have to understand that your particular issues don't take prevalence to the issues of the whole. So things that I see as a Gnostic and as a priest and as a Christian, issues that I think, matters of virtue that I think society should address, I have a platform in my church to address those. Whether it comes, and the issues that I really focus on is what's happening on the internet today, where people are starting to kind of become desensitized to traumatic violence. We saw that elderly gentleman being murdered on Facebook. And I went to the store just a couple of days after that happened, and I stood there in line and listened to these two college-age guys talking about the situation as if they were watching a television show. And one of them said, if you think that's bad, you should see the video I saw the day before old dude killed that guy. It bowled me over, because I was like, they're rating the excitement or the spectacle of the murder. There's been this kind of, but see, the thing is, what I'm starting to think about is, we've done that before with the Circus Maximus in Rome. We as a species have this natural tendency to engage in this desensitized excitement over very horrible things. So when I talk about matters of the faith in my church, these are the things that people need to focus on, not who's pissing in the men's room. But why do two young men who are going to be leaders in this world, who are going to represent a generation of people that are going to take over, how come they find excitement? And how come you see this culture, this prevailing culture of desensitized interaction? Kids don't, even in how people talk to each other over the internet. My children are, my 17-year-old and her friends are part of a generation that the internet has always existed. What's that like? Because we got to think about that. That's not our reality.
Right. And we shouldn't be creating legislation. People who don't understand that are creating legislation and creating all these studies and all this kind of stuff. They don't even understand what it's like to have lived with the internet their whole life.
Right.
I was just talking with somebody about this today. Pretty interesting. I mean, it's interesting. It makes me think, like, what would Gene Roddenberry have to say about this generation? I feel like we don't have someone at this point, you know, putting this generation under a microscope and looking at things through allegory like Star Trek did, especially back in the first few seasons of the first, you know, of the original series. He had to find creative ways to address certain situations, such as, you know, race and religion, and even sexism. Like the early episodes, the women, you know, wearing the skirts. He didn't want that to happen. Like, he had to address all this stuff. So, I mean, I'm hopeful. I'm glad that Star Trek exists and did bring up many things through allegory of the series, and important things ahead of his time even. And, you know, there's going to be another Star Trek series coming out. The movies haven't done that. The new movies, I'm hoping the new series gets back to that.
Yeah.
Exploring more philosophical.
Star Trek works best as a slow burn. And the movies have always been a built on the long-standing. Well, I guess maybe the original series only had 3 seasons.
Originals more so, yeah.
But if you look at the original movies, the Star Treks 1 through 6, those movies were not even Wrath of Khan, if you think about it, were like balls out, action packed. To a degree, even in the Next Generation movies, especially with the Next Generation movie First Contact, there was a tremendous beauty in that subtlety, with Star Trek being a show of a process. You went through with Next Generation, with Deep Space Nine, with Voyager, and very much even with Enterprise and with the original series. You went through a process with the crew. You grew into their family. It wasn't like, you know, you weren't given just 2 hours to kind of get over it. You know, you had years of developing with the development of the characters and understanding them in the direction that the writers were taking them, and Star Trek is the intention of Star Trek. If you do not have the mission of spreading the word to people that there is a better way, that we will overcome as a people, and we will unify. And if you don't bring in the lessons of family and unity and deep friendship and honor and courage, this is what Star Trek exposes you to over a long period of time, which is why a series needs to happen. And so, like you said, I'm very much hoping that Star Trek Discovery does not, you know, the jury's out with that for me, because in my heart, I mean, I can't wait to see that, but I'm hoping that the way our society is currently going, with everything is this kind of like big spectacle, and everything's flash, and everything hits you hard, and everything's got some kind of, you know, big emotional kind of rends your emotions. I mean, every serious show that I'm watching right now, I mean, whether it's Game of Thrones or The Walking Dead or I mean, anything, it's like, you almost feel a little brutalized as a member of the audience, because you're not given any kind of ability to breathe. You're not given anything to find comfort in. Everything is, you know, and of course, I guess in the subject matters of those series, you're going to have that. So you go in with that expectation that's going to be pretty raw. But I hope they don't try to mimic that pattern with Star Trek, because that's not where Star Trek should exist.
Well, I mean, we can keep on going and going probably for hours, Bob.
Yes.
About Star Trek and Roddenberry and everything. And, I mean, definitely this lends itself to another conversation with you. I want to talk, even more about your church and what you do and your philosophies on bringing people again bringing people into your church and everything, as we've kind of touched on here. So we'll be doing that probably in the next couple months. Have you come back and expand.
Excited. Sounds great.
In closing, though, like with Star Trek, and it's funny, but it makes perfect sense that we would bring up Star Trek in an episode and the philosophies that it holds. And there's a lot of good that we can take from that series. I think even though Gene Roddenberry was kind of anti-religion in some way, I think, possibly he hadn't found the right worldview yet, or maybe, but if you look at the culture when he was living in, it was very Protestant, and very, less open. And
I guess you could say that he might have been anti-religion, but he wasn't pro-bigotry. So
right.
He himself, even though for himself, didn't see the need for it, thought it was silly. He also he wouldn't have oppressed people of faith, and he wouldn't have advocated the separating of people because one would believe and one wouldn't believe. He actually advocated something of complete unity, and that I think that should be the aim of all of us. Unity
I think
with
so.
each other.
I think so. All right, and that's a good note to end on, Bob.
Right on.
Where can people find your church and everything about it? I'll be putting all the links in the show notes, but for those listening, how can they track you down?
On Facebook, it is facebook.com/Rosecross Priory. Then if you go to the Priory website, I gotta find that real quick. It is https://goldenpathreiki.wixsite.com/Priory of the Rose Cross. That's the website of our church. Then to go to the website of the mother church, which is the Oriental Apostolic Church of Damkar. That would be church-of-damkar.org. And of course from my contact page or from the links page of my website, you can also go to the website of the Order of Saint Cyprian of Antioch, which I'm part of. It's an order within the Oriental Apostolic Church of Damkar. You can also go to the homepage of the Liberal Gnostic Church, which is a rite. It's my rite or practice, style of practice within the Oriental Apostolic Church of Damkar. And that is under the authority of Tal Barnabas, who's my Bishop Superior. So you can, there's a number of links that kind of, when you go to the Priory of the Rose Cross website, the links page takes you to everything that has to do with who we are as an apostolic and liturgical church, and what does that mean, and how does Gnosticism fit in, and so anything you would want to know is right there.
Awesome. All right. Bob McDonald, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for
chatting with us about all this. Thanks for being up to this, man. I'm glad it worked out, and we'll definitely be talking to you again.
Live long and prosper.
Peace and long life, brother.
Thank you very much.